Hi everyone, for those of you that don't know me, I am Jessie Oliver and I am on the team, as was mentioned earlier. And my role on the team has been very diverse, but largely I've been doing the technical stuff, so I will touch on that a tiny bit, but I'll try not to get too geeky. Okay, so I just want to say that so a lot of the things were mentioned that SciStarter.org can do, right? But we need to be clear in where we're at and where they're at and sort of what that potential is. So I thought I would just kind of outline that a tiny bit. And please note, these are just examples. This is not exhaustive. And part of what this afternoon's discussion will be is to look at broader opportunities for what we could do that maybe I haven't thought about, because this is just off the top of my head. So if we think about planning, you might want to find inspiration. If you're looking to start a project, you might really want to find out what's already out there, and also making sure you don't reinvent the wheel, but you might also want to know what already exists and finding potential collaborators. So if you're going to do another project on koalas, please collaborate with other people doing koala stuff, because there's lots of koala projects. For example, not to be too specific, but it popped to my head. And engaging is really important, right? So the power of SciStarter is once you have a project listed, it can be shared broadly through different channels and avenues, and it will be shared through SciStarter.org if we ask them to, and they do things like newsletters nationally. We, at the moment, don't have our own newsletter, but we are looking at that potential. We're kind of trying to assess, is that something that is of interest? Because it does take a lot of time to put newsletters together. All right, so definitely thinking about promoting your project through that. Lots of people can go through the SciStarter platform. It is shared with all the partners that were mentioned earlier, in particular the Australian Citizen Science Association, and we're working really closely with ALA and SciStarter.org, and the Environmental Institute could share stuff for us as well. So there's lots of potential for growth there too, and over time we're interested in broadening those partnerships, of course. And I think that's something that Darlene highlighted very well of what's happening in the United States. Wouldn't it be awesome if we could do something that big here? Right? But as she said, you have to forge partnerships that have the support to be able to do that. So the other way is sharing collections of topical things. So for example, I was working, and how I started to work with Darlene most directly is I was working with the UN Environment during COVID to put together a collection of citizen science projects. And I said, hey, Darlene, do you want to get involved in this with SciStarter? Could you help create some assets for us? And they created some beautiful collections of projects focusing education that kids could get involved in from home, featuring citizen science. And it was a beautiful collaboration, and that's what really inspires me to think about how can we actually create these really holistic collections to support different groups of people in their own interests, and seeing the outcomes of that were incredible. And so also promoting strong examples. So we've heard a lot today about best practices by Annie and some other folks. And so it's really important that we elevate those projects that are doing things well. And when I say doing things well, having a diverse range of outcomes from the scientific output to really meaningfully engaging kids into avenues of being involved in science directly and having outcomes as students. Not just tokenistic kind of, oh, we got kids involved, right? So really elevating what those things are, and then forming affiliations would also be great. So when I'm talking about affiliations, that's slightly different than the partnerships. That's relating more to, we haven't yet explored how we can leverage SciStarter.org and how they have partnered with iNaturalist. We do have iNaturalist Australia here, working with the Atlas of Living Australia. And so there's a potential there for us to build that partnership too. But all of that type of stuff takes a lot of really geeky technical talk and time, a lot of time. And so what do you need when you have to pay for time? You need money, right? So we need to be thinking really deeply about these types of collaborations and how they can happen and what is actually needed to make them meaningful. And there's just so much exciting stuff that could happen with a bit of support and strategizing what those might be. And evaluating interests too. So Darlene did mention that they have different mechanisms behind the scenes, different types of evaluations that are available, and she did mention trainings. Now, a lot of those are very US-centric, and they would be adapted for the Australian audience if we had the mechanisms to do that. And also looking at research trends, what I'm thinking about here as a researcher myself with different hats on, research trends, like for example, you can tell a lot when you're looking at the growth of citizen science over time, or the diversity shifts and all kinds of different taxa exploration, and then more broadly than biodiversity, what else is happening in citizen science, and where are those untapped areas that we should actually be working to empower the public to get involved and advocate for themselves. And it might be something like medicine or totally different areas of science that we haven't even really delved into. And like computer science often underpins citizen science but isn't even recognized. So we need to really do a better job at really reaching that and broadening in that way. I would like to know who has projects listed where. So does anybody in the room already have their project on SciStarter.org? So you went to the American platform. So Frank, you have Echidna CSI, I think, yep, on SciStarter.org. And so then that flowed to SciStarter Australia already, and I know because I've looked at the data. And so what about folks with Atlas of Living Australia? Does anybody have their project? So a couple people, you want to make changes to your project's records, which I encourage you to always go back and update them from time to time so they keep up to date when people go to look for projects, because that's the #1 feedback we get from people looking for projects. They're really disappointed when they hit records that are out of date. And it's really important for project managers to really realize how much that impacts engagement, and it can really affect the citizen science community overall. So if your project has wrapped up, make sure and go back and take your project down, or at least, recognize that it's done. It's really, really, really important. I can't quite emphasize that enough.